Hello again, my fellow adventurers and dungeon masters. Today we will be continuing our exploration of Etharis in our Lore of the Land, episode 2, the Bürach Empire. Let me read you a quote from an ancient librarian from Earlfort named Ingmar Harkon. It goes like this. Imagine 4 halflings standing atop each other and masquerading as a tall king, and you'll get an idea of what the Bürach Empire is. So follow me into the provinces of Bürach and let's find out what is happening there. The Bürach Empire, blessed by the gods of Etharis, the 4 gods, in the 4 provinces of Northernland, Unterland, Rauland, and Abandonland. They were united under the Emperor Indorius almost 500 years ago, from what I understand. And Indorius was bestowed the power to unite these regions into one empire. And the empire stretched as far as to the waters of the Ostoyan Empire here in the east, up into the Grarjord, which we visited in our last episode, and as far south as the Rock Teeth Mountains. Now, the Bürach Empire is but a shadow of its former self, led by Emperor Leopold I 10 years ago, a young prince that became the emperor. He was somewhat like the wee boy from the Eyrie in Game of Thrones, from hundreds of years of inbreeding among the royal family. This child emperor was born a bit psycho, a bit sick in the head, and he got it in his mind that all 4 of the gods needed to war against each other so that one would be chosen. So we have one god representing each of the 4 regions. For example, in Northernland, the god Ulmir, who is the god of magic and chaos, bestowed the powers here. And he gave to the Emperor Leopold the Orb of Farsight. And here, in the Unterland, the god Malagant, he's the god of war and conquest, he bestowed upon the emperor the Sword of Might. And here in the south, in Rauland, in these mountains, was the god of order and construction, and this god goes by the name of Galt. There we have it, Galt, the god of order and construction in this wee mountainous region where dwarves and gnomes lived. And finally, here in Abandonland, we had the goddess Aurelia, goddess of healing and protection, who provided the emperor with the Hearthfire breastplate of protection. So once adorned with all of these artifacts, these powerful artifacts and armor, the gods bestowed a piece of their soul into these artifacts, and as the young emperor began to go mad, perhaps from outside forces, perhaps from old gods, perhaps the chained oblivion, or perhaps some kind of H.P. Lovecraft maddening god, this emperor Leopold ended up infecting the gods and causing them to go to war with one another, and also the people of each of these provinces to go to war with one another to decide on which god would reign superior and supreme among them all. That did not, of course, end well, and small factions from each of the provinces of Unterland, Northernland, Abandonland, and Rauland sent assassins and worked together to assassinate the Emperor Leopold and upon that happening, the land went into utter chaos, and then this caused the gods to pretty much annihilate one another. It's not so clear as to whether they were annihilated by one another or if they just were pulled into the void. But in a moment of clarity, the goddess Aurelia, the goddess of healing and protection of Abandonland, she sacrificed herself, plummeting from the heavens into this lake Osea and protecting this region from total destruction by the other gods before they disappeared. And this lake, by the way, the lake Osea, was created by one of her disciples coming to this barren kind of land and striking its spear into the ground, and it created that amazing lake, which is said to have healing properties, and perhaps even still the head in a marble giant statue, kind of Statue of Liberty like form, perhaps at the bottom of the lake. But no one is allowed to go there because of the holy church of the Hearth Keepers. So let's start with Abandonland and its capital city, Altenheim. Altenheim is the largest city in all of Etharis. It's a walled city with large towers, completely protected from any sort of siege. However, the city is like an old lion ravaged by illness. The wealthy and the rich are quite pious and righteous and upright during the day, but when the evening and night comes, they have these wild drug-induced parties with alcohol and debauchery. I would say they perhaps are even infected by the 7 shades of Citri, which is one of the diseases that can be found in Etharis. So you also have dream leaves coming in from the north here by the Valakan clans, and the dream leaves is this kind of drug that it causes all your dreams to become true, kind of like a virtual reality drug. They call it the caller of the poor because they dream of whatever could be their wildest fantasies coming true to happen, and then they awaken from the drug and, well, their lives are still in disarray. But so this is a city, they call it the City of Joy, Altenheim, and apart from these parties going on and what have you, you have the Holy Church of the Hearth Keepers, who are kind of these monks and meisters who are watching over the land and especially over the current ruler of the city, who is the current Emperor Aratron I. But it is not quite clear where he is at present. He could be not present, as he may have become too addicted to this partying and drug fiasco going on. I liken it to perhaps something like the film Eyes Wide Shut going on there. But he does have a son who's 12 years old. He's a ruler, the Aratron II, and the Hearth Keepers are keeping a close eye on this boy, trying to bring him up to become a powerful emperor. And he's watched over by Roland Murich, who is the Pope of the Holy Church of the Hearth Keepers. Now, after Leopold I was assassinated, this was around 10 years ago, terrible things started to happen in the land of the Bürach Empire. A antlered, tall, wicker-like creature with a perhaps head of a bull or a goat, like a skeletal head, was said to be seen roaming the lands. And along with this came a whole slew of hordes of different manifestations, aberrations, and terrible creatures. This aberration, this terrible entity called the Beast, has caused zombie-like corrupted abominations with several arms and disfigured faces and corruption to start spreading throughout Altenheim and Abandonland as a whole. And the Hearth Keeper, the Holy Church of the Hearth Keepers, has made it a crime to bring up anything about this beast, that it exists. They don't want anybody to think that it exists. Yet it's also a crime to withhold information about the beast, and you could be accused of being in league with the beast entity if you do not report this to the Holy Hearth Keepers. And they've pretty much closed off the entire city because they don't want anybody leaving. You would need a special permission to leave the city by the authorities. And so everyone is pretty much kept to their own provinces now and are not able to travel freely. One more thing on Abandonland, there are some other cities here. There's one called Wallstein, and with this new Drakkenheim book coming out, which is another book that is supported by our friends who created Grim Hollow, I'm planning on putting Drakkenheim here. And what's happened in Drakkenheim is these crystals, I'm going to say that around the time of the death of Leopold I, a twin comet was in the sky, and shards of the comet crashed into this city, Drakkenheim, which will be Wallstein, and caused these corrupting crystals to change everything in the city. And well, that's where we'll have our ratkins and underground rattling like creatures and all the adventures that will take place in Drakkenheim. Let's go then to Northernland. Now, Northernland kind of reminds me of old Berlin during the Berlin Wall. Over here to the west, we have Erlfort and Bardic colleges. They are connected still to the Empire, still loyal to the current Emperor, Aratron. And the person living here, or the main ruler, if you will, is the Archduchess Maelfa, and I would liken her kind of to like a Professor McGonagall kind of person. This whole area kind of reminds me a little bit of Hogwarts, bards and wizardry, kind of a Harry Potter-esque area with these major schools of magic and wizardry where bards and magicians can go. Etharis is a low magic world, so elsewhere in the lands, magic is in fact illegal, and you would need a license to use magic, and most peasants and serfs could go their whole lives without seeing any magic. But here they're training powerful warcasters, so it's even a bit darker than a Harry Potter kind of film. It's a much darker warcaster colleges and this sort of thing going on here. They were once united with the other Nordland, but Northernland on the east side is trying to return to the old ways, and they've kind of extricated or separated themselves from the Empire. They are referred to as kind of bog people. So they are led by the Archdruid Patriarch Alfric of the Oaken Court, and he is currently using his, I'm having Eladrin rangers and hunters who can ride on war bears as well, and they are fighting off the putrid woods that are being corrupted by the beast. I'm imagining also from the Warhammer fantasy Nurgle and these like boar flies and this kind of corruption that the players would see as they're entering into this region. Okay, that's our Northernland. Let's go to Unterland next. Now, Unterland for me is an area similar to, if you've played Legends of Runeterra and seen the art there, Unterland I would liken to Noxus, just this total barbarian-like, warrior-like, soldier-like area. In the more let's say, civil or organized areas. You have Olstenburg. There's this main garrison there, led by Lord General Vasily Romer. And he is currently at war trying to reclaim what the Empire once owned. Over here, you see the shadow. This is pretty cool because the sunlight is hitting in just a way that you see the shadow of the Ostoyan Empire, which we will get into next. But this, in fact, used to be owned by the Bürach Empire, but they have been pushed back by a splurge of undead and vampires. And this has kind of created a natural wall here in the mountains. And these soldiers are fighting back against that. So that brings to mind also Game of Thrones, the Lannisters' forces. They are the largest standing army and include war wizards in that army in all of Etharis. So very powerful, a good place to go and train up a warrior or a barbarian. They do, in fact, have the Imperial Arena there where you can show off your skills and your martial training. They also have tents with jousting, horseback riders, bows and arrows, crossbows and catapults, everything you'd want in this sort of a adventure. I would even go as far as to say the colors here would be blood and shit. That would describe that area. You can see it's completely war-torn and ravaged as well. They've chopped out all the lumber to create their war machines. They've gathered iron and other jewels and metals from the Grabenstein mines here and sent those here south to Stenwald in Rauland, where they are preparing all of these weapons and armor of war. And just something I might include in this area as they venture there would be this campaign, Enemy in Shadow. This is the companion to the Enemy in Shadow campaign module. And that would be awesome to kind of take them down that path in this area. It feels very Warhammery to me. Another place they could be sent from Unterland is as far north as this Mount Vengeance. And I'll share a little bit about Mount Vengeance in our next video in Ostoya, as well as Runheim, where my current party is adventuring. Now, let us go to the south, to the Rock Teeth Mountains of the Dwarves and the Gnomes. And Dwarves and Gnomes sound quite nice and boisterous, with steins of ale and laughter and so on, but not so much in Etharis. Rauland is more like a Soviet authoritarian goulash, as their god, Galt, became insane with the madness of Leopold's death. He began to make things very strict and worked these dwarves and gnomes to death almost. So they're almost like those dark dwarves found in the Underdark at this point. They are led by Archduke Ulrich Eisenherz, who is currently rumored to have the Hearthfire breastplate, which is one of those 4 artifacts that Leopold was given. He denies it, of course. This main city here of Stenwald is kind of this way up into the mountains, and then you see these cobblestone streets, smog and smoke, mists and rain, and this amazing stone architecture, more impressive than anywhere else in the land. I would liken it perhaps to Andorra, you know, in between France and Spain, with these sometimes slushy snow coming down, sometimes snow, sometimes rain. And here is where they create all the steel, weapons, armor, jewelry, and sundry items in the Rock Teeth Mountains, also referred to as the Dwarves and Gnomes call it Hermannstadt. And they've been living there, in fact, for 3,000 to 4,000 years. So they were here even before the human expanse happened hundreds of years ago, before this emperor. And what's currently happening there is that the beast's influence has created these geist-like creatures, these kind of marionette creatures that spring and lurk in the night and slay people, hanging them up and killing them with kind of puppet strings, razor sharp strangling, and no one can find them. So it's a pretty terrifying place to go out at night. There's one of the members, this human that lived there named Artem Drago, has in fact even intentionally become a werewolf to try to go after these marionette geist-like creatures, and is now living in the outskirts of Stainwald in these woods. There's also in this area the castle of Martorius, and in Castle Martorius there's this wizard tower, kind of this octrine magical wizard tower, which also appeared around the end of Leopold I. And that's where I might bring in, look out, wizardry. Once again, we have the Heart of the Maelstrom campaign, which the image is like that. You can read the story online. I'll click the link below. But I may tie in that this wizard is looking for these artifacts, and perhaps even something more. This Martorius mad wizard, and that may be causing a maelstrom way up north in Cindergast, and all that unrest of the elements of fire, earth, wind, and ice in the north. So that brought us to the Rockteeth Mountains, to Rauland. I wanted to include Lesich, which is kind of this Dagon, H.P. Lovecraft kind of land, but that may be a bonus video. If we get over 200 views, we'll do an extra video on Lesich. And yeah, also to tie it into the Grajord, which was our first video, up here you have the teeth, and you have these Viking-like Valakan, specifically 3 of the Valakan tribes, but perhaps from the east as well. They're coming down in their long boats and their long ships, and they're raiding Earl Fort and raiding along the lands that aren't as protected here. And even apart from this, you have Greffen Dam here, which is this amazing dam. It's kind of like the Alps. On the top you have all these wealthy aristocrats, rich people, and they are rich because the water that is held in the lake above the dam, called Aquanos, is a water that's used for potions, and it cannot be heated or frozen other than through magical means. And so you have these rich people living up here, making all the profit off that. And then living below the dam in an area called the Shade, you have kind of the poor people who are, again, addicted to those dream leaves, the collar of the poor, and they are even being affected by the weeping pox, which is also spreading across the land. So you've got to deal with the vampires, the undead, the weeping pox, the shades of Sitri, as well as all of the catastrophic things caused by the beast. Oh, the beast is also causing in Unterland kind of these chaos warriors whose armor has been melded into their skin. I'll be using perhaps beastmen and chaos warriors as the beast's minions in this area. Up here again in Northernland you have the beast's Nurgle-like creations, manifestations, mutations of the Fae. There's also easy access into the Feywild from Northernland. Again, in the west, you have the mutations. Drakenheim will be here for me with these abominations of people who've been mutated and corrupted. And in the south, you have those marionette-like geists assassinating people in the night. So if you're a player, maybe keep that to yourself. Don't let your DM say, oh, well, I know there's some guys down here. No, no, no. you keep all of these secrets to yourself. There's been lots of spoilers for the Dungeon Masters. I hope you found some inspiration in this video. And one last thing I want to include is Trudvang, another one of my favorite books here. I will be using Trudvang in that Northernland area, as the art is very righteous for this kind of foresty fey style. So may all your adventures be great, and I will see you in the next video.